Welcome to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast with Tom Rosenbauer, bringing you tips, tricks, and techniques to help you get the most from your time on the water. Here's acclaimed fly fishing author and lifelong fly fishing enthusiast, Tom Rosenbauer.
Welcome to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast. Gary Kurtz of Columbus, Ohio, sent us an email and said that he lives in an area where there's lots of smallmouth bass, and he wants to know about how to find them, how to catch them, and how to present the fly. So, Gary, this pod's for you. It's funny that smallmouth bass, although they're pretty well distributed across the country, are actually only native to the Great Lakes and Upper Mississippi River system, and you find them in Maine and New Hampshire and California and Oregon and in the deep south where you have, at least where you have cold, clear lakes. But smallmouths were actually native to a fairly limited area of the eastern United States, but they were stocked all over the place back around the turn of the century when the fish stocking craze was in full bloom, and they were transporting fish back and forth across the country. So a little aside there on smallmouths. But you'll find them anywhere you find cool, clean water with lots of rocks. You seldom find smallmouths where it's really weedy and mucky or muddy. You'll seldom find them in backwaters. Most of the places you'll find them are in a current or in a lake along a rocky shoreline where there's some good wave action and oxygenation. They like a little cooler water than largemouths, and they like a little clearer water than largemouth bass. And of course, they're nowhere near as popular as largemouths because you don't find them everywhere, and they don't grow as big as largemouths. But they're a fantastic fish on a fly rod. They're almost a fish that's made for a fly rod. They love to eat flies. They jump. They run. They're very eager to take flies. They're not as selective as trout, and they're just a wonderful, eager fish to catch. How do you find smallmouth bass? Well, you often find them in the lower parts of trout streams on popular trout rivers like the Housatonic and the Connecticut or the Delaware on the New York-Pennsylvania border, Potomac, the Snake River, the Umpqua River on the West Coast, even the Missouri River in Montana. You'll find smallmouths down below the trout zone. So in the places where trout peter out because the water gets too warm or too slow, you often find a very, very robust smallmouth population. You'll actually find them mixed in with the trout in places too. Typically smallmouths and big brown trout like to coexist. But you will find them in lower reaches of streams, as well as streams that just never get cold enough for trout. As long as they're relatively cool and clear, you'll find good smallmouth habitat. And where do you find them in these streams? Well, kind of pretty much the obvious places where there's a place where a bigger fish can hide and ambush a bait fish or a crayfish. Smallmouths just love crayfish. Is a good place for a smallmouth. So if there are big rocks in a river, they're going to be around the big rocks. They love these steep, rocky cliffs with deep pools below them that you see in a lot of rivers. They love being around down trees, wherever there's some cover that'll hold bait fish. And they love being on the edge of current. They don't like to be in very fast current, not as fast as a trout, but they'll be in the eddies and right along the edge of faster current. And one of the overlooked places for smallmouth bass is in the tail of the pool, where a pool in a river broadens out and it gets shallow and really wide, and sometimes doesn't even have much cover. But smallmouths love the tails of pools because it's a perfect place to ambush crayfish or baitfish. They can really see their prey there and they can get at them. So don't overlook, fish the obvious rocky and brushy places for smallmouths, but don't overlook the tails of pools, particularly in the early morning or the evening when the fish may be out there prowling around looking for crayfish and baitfish. If you're fishing for smallmouths in lakes, the best places are, again, rocky shorelines. If there's a lot of mud or sand or lily pads, you're not going to find many smallmouths. You're going to find them more where you have down trees and rocks, and especially, the smallmouths are going to be especially prevalent where you have a deep drop-off and then a shallow zone. The smallmouths will use that deeper water during the day to hide, and then early morning and in the evening they'll come out of the deeper water and slide up into the shallow water to chase bait fish and crayfish and insects. Smallmouth bass, both in rivers and lakes, do love to eat insects, and they most often respond to the bigger insects, big caddisflies, big stoneflies, like the hexagenia species is a really popular mayfly on a lot of lakes, huge hatches on the Great Lakes and some big rivers, and they're about a size 6 or an 8. Mayfly, very large mayfly. And smallmouths will respond really well to that or almost any decent-sized insect on the surface. The neat thing about smallmouths is when you see them rising, you don't have to worry too much about matching the hatch. You can often throw a streamer right into the middle of the rising fish, or you can throw just a silly little cork popper in the middle of the rising fish right amongst the mayflies and let the thing float down, and the smallmouths will often take that just as well as they'll take a carefully presented dry fly. It's not the smallmouths won't eat trout, dry flies, and nymphs. It's just that you typically don't have to get that fancy. The other nice thing about smallmouths in rivers is that they will most often feed all day long when you have some current, even in the middle of the summer. So in lakes, they often go to the deep water during the day. In the summertime, in May and June and early July, and some places they're often very shallow because they're spawning at that time of year, and they're in shallow water, making their redds or nests in the shallow water and mating and spawning, and they get quite aggressive then. But as the summer goes on, when we're into this period, smallmouths in lakes will creep into the deeper water during the day. You can catch them in shallower water along the shoreline in the morning or in the evening. But if you have smallmouths in a river, they're going to be just as eager at high noon in August as they would be at dawn and dusk. So it's nice to be able to get out with a canoe or a bass boat or a kayak in a river and fish for smallmouths. You can do it all day long, and they're particularly interested in surface food during the day. So you can catch them with a popper, which is obviously the most fun. When you take them on the surface is the most fun way to catch them. When you fish a popping bug or any kind of surface fly for smallmouths, and by the way, the most popular smallmouth fly of all times is the Sneaky Pete popper. It's a little bright-colored, either red or orange or chartreuse, bullet head popper. So it doesn't have a cupped face. It doesn't make a big blurp in the water when you pull it. It's called a slider, and it goes along pretty silently. It kind of slips along the top of the water. But the Sneaky Pete, 9 out of 10 smallmouth fly fishers, when you ask them what their favorite fly is it's going to be the Sneaky Pete. And of course, you can buy the Sneaky Pete at www.orvis.com. We've got plenty of them. Other kind of poppers will work as well. What you want to remember with fishing a surface popper for smallmouths is that you can't fish that fly too slowly. So if you're in really slow current or if you're in a lake, cast the popper out there and don't do anything. Tighten your line enough to get the line tight, but don't move the fly. Let it sit there, let it sit there, let it sit there until you can't stand it any longer, until all the rings dissipate and the rubber legs stop wiggling. Often smallmouths will eyeball a fly. They'll slide right up to it and they'll look at it for a full minute, which is a long time when you're staring at a fly, believe me. And all of a sudden they'll just charge the thing and inhale it. And if they don't on that first cast, particularly if you can see them hovering along under the fly, then make just the smallest of twitches, just enough to move the rubber legs on the fly. Often that'll do the trick. If you can't see the fish chasing the fly, or you haven't had any strikes, then you can try throwing it out there and increasing your speed a little bit. Sometimes even a steady retrieve, steady chugging along of the popper will work. But for the most part, if you're patient, you're going to catch more smallmouth bass on a surface fly. If you're in faster current, you want to throw the fly upstream of where you think the fish is going to be and just let that popper float down. Occasionally give it just the tiniest of twitches so that the fish know that it's something alive and not just a stick that's fallen in the water. But it's very easy to move a surface popper too much, so slow down on that. There are times when smallmouths won't take surface flies, and that's too bad because that's the most fun. But they do eat a lot of minnows and crayfish deeper in the water. And in those cases, it's fun to fish a streamer fly. Typically, you don't need to go to a sinking line unless you're fishing in a lake where you suspect the fish might be 10 or 20 feet deep. But in a river or in the shallows, you can pretty much get away with a floating line. Streamer is the same way. You cast your streamer out there and let it sink. Often smallmouths will take that fly before you've even started to retrieve, just slowly sinking in the water. So tighten up your line again and watch the tip of your floating line. And if that line darts or moves forward, a smallmouth or something else has probably inhaled the fly on the way down, and you want to set the hook. Once the fly sinks a little bit, then you want to make a slow foot-long strip, let the fly sink again, another slow foot-long strip, make the fly sink again. Like with poppers, if it doesn't work, if the slow retrieve doesn't work, because smallmouth bass often take the fly on the drop. In other words, you strip the line and the fly kind of rises to the surface, and then when you stop stripping, it'll drop back toward the bottom. They like to take it on the drop. But if that doesn't work, then try a faster retrieve. Try throwing it out there and stripping relatively rapidly and with no pause in between, because that'll sometimes turn them on. You never know. If you're going to fish subsurface flies for smallmouths, streamers, or crayfish imitations, some of the better ones are the craw dog, which is a kind of a buggy crayfish imitation. A conehead woolly bugger. Conehead woolly bugger sinks fairly quickly, so it gives you that nice darting motion, and when you stop retrieving it, it drops pretty quickly. And a woolly bugger may suggest a crayfish, a baitfish, a sculpin, a leech, a hellgrammite. The woolly bugger looks like nothing in particular, but it looks like a lot of things in general, so you can really imitate a lot of popular smallmouth foods with a woolly bugger. Fly that a friend of mine has been using recently is one that I developed for saltwater fishing, for striper fishing. It's called the rattle-eye clouser, and it's a clouser minnow fly, but it has a little glass rattle instead of metal eyes in the front. And when you pull that thing through the water, it makes little clicking sounds, and it may sound like a crayfish or a minnow or something. And a lot of people like the clouser minnow for smallmouths. It was originally developed for smallmouths, and this he swears that this rattle-eye clouser turns on the smallmouths even more than the standard clouser. So you find that in saltwater fly, listed in saltwater flies on the Orvis website. One final word on tackle for smallmouth bass. If you have a relatively heavy trout rod, by heavy I mean 5-weight or 6-weight, you've probably got a good smallmouth rod already. If you're going to be fishing a lot of bigger flies, bigger bugs, maybe the smallmouths in your area like big poppers or bigger streamers, you might want to go to a 7 or 8 weight rod. But most times a 6-weight, 9-foot 6-weight rod is about perfect for smallmouth bass with a floating line. And if you fish lakes, you might want a sinking or a sink tip line as well. But pretty much get away with a 9-foot 6 almost anywhere you fish for smallmouths. And leaders don't need to be too fancy either. Smallmouths are not particularly leader shy. 7.5 or probably 9 foot is better, because smallmouths sometimes live in clear water. So a 9-foot 1X or 2X leader, fairly heavy leader, is about all you need for smallmouth bass fishing. It's really, really fun because you can just throw on a pair of shorts and put a few flies in a box, stick a spool of tippet in your pocket, and you're ready to go. You don't need a vest, or you don't need to carry a lot of stuff for smallmouth. Smallmouths are known as brand X in a lot of the rivers in northern Maine, because they were introduced, and at times they take over from the native brook trout. And a lot of the old timers in the North Country don't like smallmouth bass. But if you have them near you, I guarantee you that if you go out fly fishing for smallmouths, you're going to have yourself a ball. You'll be less frustrated than you are trout fishing, and you'll come back with a big smile on your face. If you want a little bit more information or want to take a look at some of the flies I've recommended this week, go to www.orvis.com/smallmouth, and we've got some extra information and a nice picture of a smallmouth bass there. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast with Tom Rosenbauer. Since 1856, anglers worldwide have counted on Orvis to help them get the most from their time on the water. To learn more and to shop the world's finest fly fishing gear, including the award-winning zero-gravity Helios rod, visit www.orvis.com/podcast.